Hey guys, Shane here. So welcome to this build log video of Dragon's 135th M4A1 76. As always with most Sherman and tank builds, we begin with the running gear and bogie assemblies. So I'm just beginning to put the dry sprockets and return rollers together. These are pretty okay little assemblies, though the detail is pretty okay. Some of the guiding or locator tabs and pegs are a little bit light, so it does take a few seconds just to line things up correctly. I'm also laying down quite a bit of glue onto the dry sprockets, as there's going to be a lot of tension on these sprockets due to the fact that this kit comes with DS tracks. So there will be a little bit of torsion on these parts, so ensure that you get a very strong bond. So I tend to ensure that I put down quite a bit of glue, not to the point where I'm melting any of the parts, but just enough to make sure that it's not going to be pulled apart. So now moving on to the many road wheels for the Sherman. So this is a Fifi SS suspension system. So as you can see, these are two-part wheel assemblies. So there's a back insert that you slot in. They are keyed, so I didn't realise that at first. I was wondering why they were sitting a little bit proud. So do take a couple of seconds just to line them up. So I'm just using a bit of contactor for this. It's a bit more of a slow drying glue, and it's also a very strong glue. Normally what I'm going to do here, when we actually put these into the bogies, I'm going to have the insert parts facing inside the bogies, because there is a bit of seam on these, so I can't be arsed cleaning it, so I'm just going to put it on the inner faces of the bogies, so you're not going to see any of it. So now we're going to start moving on to the swing arms. So these are a little bit more simplified on a Dragon kit. The swing arms are in one piece, so it does make building them quite easy. On Asuka models or formerly Tasca models, these parts were actually individual and they swing independently of each other, just like the real suspension did. However, these are pretty quick to put together. I did find that some of the road wheels were a little bit too small to fit into the axle, so I actually had to take my hobby blade and kind of rebore the locating slot for the axles so they could actually slide into the bogies. But it only happened on one or two rare occasions on this. And again, I'm just coming back to using contacta. Again, I want a nice strong bond. I'm not being overly clean about it either. It doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to do the job, because once everything's together, you're not going to see most of it anyway. So that's going to put the return rollers, put them together now. And again, they're almost just like scaled up versions of the road wheels with an insert that you just slide in. Again, these are keyed, so just line them up or they won't sit properly. So if they don't sit flush, just pull them out and see can you realign them. Now we're on to the actual volute suspensions themselves, which is a nice little detail. Again, very little of this is actually going to be seen once we insert it inside the bogies. However, it's more than enough for our needs. They're kind of fiddly to put together, but they're not too bad. And again, I'm just using some contactor here, so I'm not really worried about being overly clean, as most of this detail is going to be hidden. This is often the real boring part I find of Sherman builds, is just doing the suspension. Because if you build one, you build all of them. But then again, it's one of these things you just have to kind of switch off and just go through the motions. So now we're building up the bogies. So what I find the easiest way to insert the volute suspension into the bogies is to half slide the swing arms down the axle, and then, before we fully push the swing arms home into the bogie, slide the volute suspension heads in over it, like I'm doing here. Otherwise it's very tricky to line them up. And again, I'm just going to use some contacta here to push the two sides of the bogies together, and once they're together, I'll just slide in the roller like so. It's a very simple way of doing it. I also just make sure everything's postable, so that's not so much because I care a lot about workability, but I want to make sure that there's no glue on the swing arms of the suspension, so when I actually put the model on the ground or on a diorama base, all the wheels are touching the ground. That's more what I'm concerned about here, rather than posability. Again, half slide in the swing arm, then put in the volute suspension, and then push it all home and line it up to its appropriate housing within the bogie. And then just lock it all home with some glue, being careful not to glue any of the moving parts in place. And then before the glue sets, just slide in the return roller, and there we have it, nice and simple. I'm also going to put down the track skids. Now there's a big seam line on them that you have to scrape off, so I've cleaned all these parts off camera, so just to speed things up, but there is a little bit of cleanup required on this kit. There's another detail that I'll end up adding later on in the build that I forgot to film, which is the mounting bolts for this return roller arm, which is the part I'm inserting now. So the M4 Sherman was designed to be modular, so it could be basically designed to be very easy to maintain in the field. So what they did was, where the swing arms, or not where the swing arm, but where the return roller is, that could actually be bolted off and put onto either side, and on the opposite side to where the return arms are mounted for the return roller, there's actually the bolts on the other side of the bogie. So the whole idea is that you could put the bogies on either side of the vehicle and just bolt on the swing arms on the appropriate side. It's a detail that is often not included. Actually, I don't think I've seen it ever included on a Sherman model. It's not a hard thing to add. Just take a pin vise, do a bit of measuring to where you think the bolts are. I did it by eye, so it's not perfect. It's just one of the reasons why I didn't show it either. So it's only a small detail, but again, if you do like making somewhat accurate Shermans, it is a nice detail to add, and it's not a difficult one to achieve. So I'm just working my way through the bogies here. So now I'm working on the engine deck, and I'm just drilling a couple of holes. So again, make sure you go through the instructions and ensure that you drill the holes you're meant to before you glue everything in place. I had me drill holes that didn't actually have parts for them, and there's a few issues on the instructions of this kit that don't actually tell you to put parts in. So I drill out holes there for the toe eyes, or the toe hooks, and it doesn't mention them in the instructions. So there should be a piece on one of the sprues which is a mirror of the molded on toe hooks, and just basically glue them in place. There's no mention of it. That's why you're actually drilling the holes. So they have you drill the holes, but they don't actually tell you what they're for. Now I'm going to start mounting some of the lower hull details in, such as the rear engine deck. The fit on this wasn't particularly great. It did kind of slip and slide quite a bit. You'll kind of see me here kind of battling with it, which was something that I did not expect to fight me, but it kind of did. Now we're mounting the mounting brackets for the return rollers, or for the idlers should I say. Once again, the instructions were a little bit vague about the placement of these. However, just a couple of test fits and you'll quickly figure out which way they're meant to go. Now the actual idler tensioners are going in. and the mount for the tow hitch. Now I have the hitch upside down, so which I quickly realise and swing it around. I'll actually end up leaving off the actual tow hitch itself completely, just have the mount for it after a while, so it just keeps snapping. Adding some of the smaller details like the handles for the engine deck. And now we're going to add the mounts for the bogies, which are these little small triangular wedges. There's not much for these things to be glued into, by the way, so you just have to glue it into the base of the lower hull and just kind of have your finger on the inside of it and line it up. It's a bit haphazard, but it shouldn't give you any issues. This is a pretty quick build. I managed to put it together in about 3 days. I wasn't particularly going too fast with it either, and that's included in putting some of the more fiddly stowage that we put in at the end of this video. It's not a bad kit. It does have issues. It is a bit simplified in places, and some of it's not necessarily correct, and there's a few details missing as well that I add some of the more noticeable ones in this video, so I'll talk about it when we get to it. So the fake line I'm going for is in the mood, which is Lafayette Pool's M4A1 76. He's one of the more famous US tank aces. So we always seem to think that really only the Germans and like the Russians had aces, but the Allies had them as well, but they were much more rare, and their kills were never really as impressive a kill count as their German counterparts, but still very talented and very skilled tank commanders nonetheless. So now we're going on to the air scrubbers, or the air cleaners for the engine. It's a pretty nice little assembly. They're pretty well detailed, quite crisp. If you remember the inbox review I did of this kit last week, you'll notice that the quality of the plastic differs immensely from sprue to sprue. Some of these sprues are very old and some of them are quite new. So sometimes you go from very spongy detail to very crisp detail. It's basically a box of extremes. And this is one of the more crisper assemblies of the model. It's a very nice assembly. You're not going to see half of it once you install it, but it's still pretty well done. Now mounting them in place. These actually proved to be a little bit fiddly. The locating slots are too big, so there's not much of a friction fit to keep them in place. So I actually had to land up, come back and super glue them, and also I had to keep readjusting their positioning, because anytime I tried to fit the upper cast hull over the engine deck, they would actually interfere with the fit, so I had to pull them off, realign them, and then place them back in again. So these were a little bit annoying, but in the end it was fine. I managed to sort it out. Now we're moving on to the transmission cover, which is the later one-piece design. So I'm just mounting the ends of the final drives into the transmission. The fit is not great on this, if I'm honest. I actually had to do some filling here, because even though these were like bolted together type of assemblies, there were still massive gaps here on these side or end caps I'm placing here. Also, every Dragon Sherman I've built so far, the fit between the upper or lower hull and the transmission cover has always been atrocious. Like, these were separate pieces on the real Shermans. These could be unbolted and removed, so the crew could actually, or the maintenance crews could literally just take out the transmission. I think it took about 4 hours to do it. But I find that the fit is utterly atrocious, and we'll see it as we go together. And it was kind of the same on the Dragon M4A2 Tarawa that we did a few months back as well. Had the exact same issues. I've noticed so far with the Asuka models, not so much an issue. They are very well engineered, and the tolerances are much better. So I'm not entirely happy. The one thing with this kit I'm not happy about is the fit that we'll see later between the transmission and the upper hull. It's just too big a gap. So now we're putting down the base plates for the bogies. Now I'm going to be leaving the bogies separate for painting, just because if you glue them in place it becomes very difficult to get in and paint the lower hull. So I'm actually going to leave these separately, paint them all individually, and then place them back onto the model for weathering. I find it's a much more efficient and easier to use system. I've also added the side firewalls for the air covers, which you can see on the back of the engine deck. Again, the instructions are very vague for this. I actually had to look up photographs of the real vehicle to figure out how those two plates on the edges of the engine deck are meant to be mounted. So it took a little bit of trial and errors to get those to fit correctly and still look accurate. There's another part of detail that's not again mentioned in the instructions, which is the end caps for the sponsons here. So these are not mentioned whatsoever in the instructions. However, they're very easy to notice, and I just basically noticed that there was a big gap at the back of the vehicle, and I just looked through the sprues and found it. And that's using some super glue to put these into place, as there's a bit of a spring in the plastic, and just hold it for 10 or 15 seconds and you get a strong bond. So you'll kind of get this at times that the instructions will either show you the picture of a part but they won't name it, or they won't show you it at all, and they'll have you drill the hole for it but they won't actually tell you to install it. So you're going to have to kind of study the manual quite a bit, as you'll see a piece of detail that was in one step or that wasn't in one step and has been added in the preceding step, and then you have to kind of go hunting through your sprues to find it. It's not too big a problem because it doesn't happen often, but some of the ventilator caps for the upper hull, for example, which are separate parts, are actually not listed in the instructions for some bloody reason. So now we're adding the upper and lower hull. Also, another thing that I did not film was the kit. You have to sand off or saw off the front fenders of the kit to make them fit. There is a line molded in that you'll sand off, or you'll saw the front fenders off at like a 45-degree angle and then sand a small curve in. Again, it's not really clearly shown in the instructions, at least not at a first glance, but you're meant to as well. So now we're moving on to the two crew hatches for the front of the hull, the driver and machine gunner's positions. And I've also modelled their periscope slightly swiveled, because these were free swivelling, just to add a little bit of interest. These are a little bit fiddly, but they're not too bad. Once you kind of get them in place, the periscopes aren't too bad. And they are clear plastic if you want to have clear lenses. I personally don't care, I tend to paint them black anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to add the armoured covers for the periscopes. I always find it's easier to put the periscopes in first and then put the armoured covers behind them. So when you're putting down the periscopes, the mounts for the periscopes and the hatches, so if you want to make sure you have them the right way around, there should be a small little hinge system on the top of the periscope, which you can kind of see there. It's a little bit hard to see it, but make sure that's always to the back, because that's where the armour cover goes, and that's how you know which way is forward. Just lock it all in place now with some extra tin. To add the brush guards, which are molded in plastic. They are a bit overscaled, but to be honest with you, I prefer them being a little bit overscaled because they're ever a bit more easier to work with. When they're too thin, you look at them and you snap them. So these were not the worst in the world I've worked with. The photo etch ones are always probably the best option, but then again they can be a little bit fiddly to form. These went together quite easily. I was actually a bit surprised. I was expecting this assembly to fight me a lot more than it actually did. So you can see the brush guards are on now, and it's exactly the same for the other hatch here. Now I'm going to have these hatches buttoned up with the exception of the commander's position, because I want to get a commander for him later on, obviously to Mr. Pool himself. So now we're adding some of the details onto the upper hull. So we're just adding our co-driver, or should I say our driver and machine gunner positions. I've also added the transmission cover and the retaining bolts. The strip of retaining bolts just below the mount for the bow 1919 30 cal machine gun sits far too high, and I've sanded it and everything. It's not meant to sit as proud as that, because it's meant to be a later style mantlet, and there's meant to be a lip on the mantlet that comes up over the bolts to protect them. But because the bolt strip that basically is supplied just sits so high you can't even see it, so that's an inaccuracy. I could have corrected it if I really wanted to, but after an hour trying to fix it, it was just starting to sap the enjoyment out of the model, which is just as important to me as accuracy. So try to get as close as you can, and maybe you will get a better fit than I did. So now we're just adding the lifting eyes. These are a little bit too small for the slots that are supplied, so I'm going to have to come back with a bit of liquid green stuff or liquid Vallejo putty and blend them in a little bit. But then again, it's only a small simple fix. I've also added the ventilator, or should I say the radio mount beside the machine gunner position. I don't think that is mentioned, nor is the one on the turret ring. Now I'm adding what I think, so we're adding the brush guards now. These were a little bit tricky. They didn't really want to conform to the shape of the cast upper hull. And they are again a little bit overscaled. You know, they do look like they're made out of depleted uranium, they're that thick. However, it doesn't really bother me too much. I'd rather have ones that are slightly overscaled rather than trying to snap them, trying to place them on the model, if you get me. Again, it's one of those things you just have to kind of sometimes find a happy medium. Now we're adding the bow 1919 30 cal machine gun. I've used the second one in the kit. There's two of them. One of them is solid and one of them is a hollow barrel. For some reason the kit has you place the solid barrel one in, whereas I actually just took the hollow barrel one that's included in the kit and the sprues and cut off the tab on the back so it can just fit slot directly in to the solid mount. Just a better detail, and I'm a little bit surprised why Dragon would even have you use a lesser detail piece when they actually have better stuff actually in the box, which is beyond me. So now we're adding the racks for the spare track pads that will fit on the back of the vehicle. It's pretty nice little assemblies, these. And now I'm just mounting them onto the back of the tank. However, I don't have them sitting high enough in the vehicle. These racks should be up maybe another 2 or 3 mil higher up on the vehicle. I've also added the rear shelving unit onto the back of the vehicle, which is just basically a very simple L beam for all intents and purposes. It's a bit of a simplified detail. And now I'm just adding the convoy lights, which are clear plastic, but again, we're going to be painting these in anyway, so it matters not. If you really wanted to, you could paint them in a clear red and then mask them if you really want to. It's totally up to you. So now we're laying down some of the Pioneer tools. The quality of these tools varies immensely. There's much better updated sprues in this kit, but for some reason the instructions never actually tell you to use them. So I actually just took the sprues from the newer kits with their tools on it and took them instead. Details far sharper. It's one of these bizarre Dragon kits. In a way, it's kind of very reminiscent to what Dragon is doing now, where they just throw parts together from various different kits and expect you to kind of work it out for yourself. Personally, I really wish they would stop doing this. It's really bad business sense, but this kit's not the worst in the world. And again, it's a very easy kit to put together. It would be, for the most part, beginner friendly. There's a few little things you have to watch out for, but that's more down to the instructions being vague in places. So as long as you take your time, it shouldn't lead you astray. So now we're moving on to the turret details. So we're going to start with the direct vision port for the crew commander. And these do come with some nice clear plastic vision blocks. So again, if you really want these to be clear, like the real vehicle, you could mask them and leave them as clear. I'm actually just going to paint these in like a black color anyway. That's what I normally do. It's not 100% accurate, but it looks okay. Like it doesn't look completely wrong. Now, mounting these little clear plastic inserts actually was a little bit tricky. As you can see, I had to pull them out a few times, and if I put them in back to front or what have you. So now we're working on the hatch. So this hatch could, like the part I'm inserting now, could actually rotate on its own. And the crew commander actually had an azimuth, basically like various different bearing markers that he could swing. He'd get his bearing from looking at where his periscope was at, and then could guide the gunner on target using that if he so wished. I'd imagine they very rarely ever use that for that purpose, if at all, because it's just not really practical in a combat environment. You often watch the guys on like the Arma videos, and they're using all their bearing like their compass bearings for like target acquisition, which is grand in the game, but in real life it doesn't actually work as well as one might think it would. Yes, you get a very accurate bearing, but in like for rapid acquisition of a target, it's not. It'll get you killed basically. So now we're adding the split hatch for the loader, which is basically the exact same type of split hatch that the other M4 family has for the commander. It's a pretty nice little assembly. This is not much going on. A few cast numbers, which is always nice to see, as the Sherman should be full of them. And now we're moving on to the gunner's periscope, which also acted as his backup gun sights if his scope got knocked out, or his direct vision scope through the mantlet got knocked out. The armoured cover is a little bit of a tight fit here. Like I actually had to kind of force it in to get it to sit correctly, but once I pushed it down, it sat and clicked in pretty well. So adding in the lifting eye for the turret roof. As well as the radio mounts. So you tend to get more like blank places for the radios, so it's almost like the vehicle isn't carrying any, which is a bit bizarre. And I didn't really notice it at the time. I was just going through the motions of building it, and it wasn't until after I put together that obviously if you want to add your radios, you're going to have to maybe find aftermarket to place the radio mounts. You can also see I've added some more cast texturing to the turret using some liquid Vallejo putty by just stippling it on. So I wanted to hide the seam from the upper and lower hull, or turret should I say. It's not bad T-23 turret. It looks kind of accurate for the most part. There is a few inaccuracies here and there. I've heard the shape is a little bit off, though to be honest with you, it fools my eye, and that's good enough for me. The pistol port sits a little bit too proud on the turret. On the 23s, the pistol port was a little bit more shielded by the internal casting of the vehicle. But still, it's adequate for just basic scale modelling needs, unless you want to super detail it. Just adding some of the mounts for the 50 cal. Now I'm going to add a detail that is actually not included in the kit, and all the photos I've seen of the Operation Cobra M4A176s, they have this detail. And what these are is the mounting rails for the side skirts. So I've taken this from the Suka model kit that I had lying around, because I have their early M4A1, and the real early M4A1s don't seem to carry these now, which is probably not entirely true, but at least some of the pictures I've seen, some of them don't have it. So that's my excuse that I was going to cannibalize it. Now you could use it like from some very thin plastic card here, or strip, and drill some holes to make it. So I just added it in, and it's a small little detail, but it will make the difference. Most photo etch sets for Sherman come with these in photo etch. So if you want to buy aftermarket, you should have that detail included. Now it's not perfect. The rail is meant to go around the back of the vehicle as well, but I just didn't have enough to do it. And that's also when I realised that the spare track pads, the racks for them sit too low, so they would have obscured that anyway or gone the way. But still, it's better to have at least a part of that detail included than none of it. And it's little things like this that just make our model a bit more exciting and a bit more accurate. Again, it's really up to you how far you want to go. So now we're adding some other details that are often overlooked. So now we're adding the drainage holes for the fuel caps, as well as the rear of the engine deck, as in that armoured splash screen by that big armoured cover just beside the fuel caps. Now it took a while to drill through these because the plastic is so thick, and I'm just drilling the drainage hole here for the armoured cover, and it's basically a mirror on both sides, so just do it on both sides of this armoured cover. I only filmed doing it on one side, but it's on both. You're not going to see any of that detail because I'm going to be putting stowage on the back deck, and you'll actually see me use some extra tin to take away some of the burring from the drill, just to melt it away. This detail is often overlooked, and it's very rarely, if at all, ever moulded onto Sherman kits, but it is noticeable, and it's a very easy way to get some extra detail. So now we're moving on to one of the most important details I find for an M4 Sherman, which is the stowage. So I'm using some resin cast stowage from Legend Models, which is their M4A1 stowage set. Now, it doesn't fit entirely perfectly to the rear engine deck, so I've made some milliput tarps, and I've made them a bit thick just to hide the gap between the resin cast for the stowage and the engine deck. I've also taken some twine. This twine is from Zvezda's German paratrooper set, their Fallschirmjäger set, and these are meant to be the parachute shroud lines, but I'm using it for tying down the stowage onto the vehicle. And these tie down ropes really do add just that extra little bit of detail. It's always good just to spend a little bit of time with details like this, because they really will give you that extra element of detail and just bring your model to that next level. It really does make the big difference. The guy's going to have guys sitting on the back of this tank, very much like that really famous photograph of the 76 with the guys on the back during Cobra. But it's been kind of done to death, so I'm just going to go for a standard kind of M4 on its own. I'm just using a little bit of super glue here just to lock down the rope to keep the tension up. I'm also going to do some stowage for the rear shelf on the back of the vehicle, so I'm just going to glue some jerry cans together. I'm going to leave these loose though, I'm not going to glue them to the model, so I can paint these separately as well. It's going to test fit before the glue sets, just to make sure they sit correctly. And then it's going to take a little bit more super glue and glue this ammo box to the side of the jerry cans. Again, I don't want to glue it to the shelf just yet, so make sure you don't accidentally glue it in place. We'll leave it for a couple of seconds to let that set. And I'm going to make some straps and tie downs from tammy tape. I'm just going to cut some very thin, maybe 2mm wide strips here. And that's what I'm going to use for tie downs. just going to strap that around the piece there, the insert for the rear shelf, and I've super glued the back of it to lock it in place. So now move on to the tracks. So these are DS. They're fine for the Sherman. Shermans have feck all sag anyway, so you get away with it with DS. And these weren't badly damaged, so it's okay. And I'm just going to use a bit of Gorilla Glue here and just glue down both track halves, and just use I'm just using the back of my tweezers just to push that down and ensure I get a solid joint and bond between them. As there is going to be a little bit of pressure on these, so ensure that the glue bond is solid. We don't want this snapping on us, or at least like the bond coming undone or it breaking. And there we have our tracks done. And with that, our model is done and ready for painting. So I really hoped you enjoyed this little build blog, or build log, should I say. So do join me in the next part where we paint up and weather this vehicle. I have been Shane. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me harp on for the last 38 minutes. Happy modelling, guys. Stay safe. Catch you in the next video, and watch out for those busters. And bye bye.